The Colosseum was never merely a grand arena or a static monument of stone. It was humanity's first stroke of terrifying, calculated genius. A blood-soaked entertainment engine, engineered with a chillingly sophisticated purpose, to mesmerize a vast empire, coaxing its restless populace to forget the low, persistent growls of hunger, the systemic ache of injustice, and even the most primal fears lurking in the shadowed depths of their own souls. For centuries, tens of thousands did not descend upon the Colosseum simply to watch a common spectacle. They came to witness a potent, dark form of political alchemy. It was a visceral demonstration of how absolute power could transmute raw carnage, hysterical cheering, and the entire spectrum of human emotion into an astonishingly effective tool of governance. The most unsettling truth, the one that historians still grapple with today, is that it succeeded brilliantly, far exceeding its creator's wildest and most cynical expectations. Even more disturbing is the fact that, 2 millennia later, this narrative remains hauntingly relevant, echoing painful lessons into our modern age of digital distraction and performative outrage. If we dare to look beneath the weathered travertine surface, we find that the Colosseum is not merely a relic of a vanished Roman past. It is a mirror held up to ourselves, reflecting a timeless human instinct, the fatal tendency to be swept away by a stage so grand, so cacophonous, and so brilliant that we utterly forget to ask the most vital questions. Who mounted this play? What is the true price we pay for the performance? Before it became known to the world as the Colosseum, this structure stood as the first gargantuan entertainment complex in human history. It loomed so high and stretched so wide that the people of that era must have gazed upon it as a symbol, transcending the very limits of human imagination, an unprecedented wonder of the ancient world. This was the Flavian Amphitheatre, the ultimate pride of an empire whose reach, like the suffocating tentacles of a great octopus, dominated much of the known world, forcing every nation to bow before the Roman eagle. Yet, to call it a mere stadium would be superficial. It fails to capture its true, bewitching essence. This place was not built for simple pastimes or the innocent love of sport. It was erected with a far deeper, more sinister intent, to manipulate emotion, to shepherd collective thought, and to forge blood, raw and primal terror into a cold, sophisticated instrument of rule. It was a psychological weapon that burrowed into the subconscious of every citizen, reshaping their very psyche to align with the needs of the state. During its golden years, the Colosseum functioned as a massive psychological machine, a fantastical stage where the impossible became reality. From the dark, subterranean depths, snarling, exotic beasts would suddenly erupt onto the arena floor, as if summoned from the underworld itself. Scenery could shift in the blink of an eye like a divine miracle, from parched, unforgiving deserts to lush, verdant forests teeming with life. The Romans could even flood the arena, transforming it into a vast, shimmering lake to reenact titanic naval battles with breathtaking, lethal realism. To those lucky enough to witness such feats, the sensation must have been akin to beholding supernatural power, a performance orchestrated by gods rather than mortal men. St. Augustine, in his classic Work Times Confessions, recounts the poignant and cautionary story of Alypius, a virtuous man of high intellect who had sworn a solemn oath never to set foot in the arena to watch those barbaric, bloody games. One day, however, he was dragged to the stands by his friends, his eyes tightly shut in protest. In a single shattering moment, as the crowd erupted in a thunderous explosion of ecstasy following a gladiator's strike, Alypius opened his eyes. In that instant, he succumbed to the enchanting, collective bloodlust. A man of morals and firm principles was swept into the vortex of hysterical shouting just like everyone else, forsaking the vow he had made to himself. This detail is profoundly chilling. It serves as a cold reminder that humans are not always conquered by dry reason or logical argument. Often, what subdues us is a suffocating yet mesmerizing atmosphere, a crowd boiling with emotion, and the overwhelming sensation of belonging to something far greater than oneself, a fierce current of madness that few can resist. To truly understand how the Roman Empire maintained its iron grip for centuries, and why it eventually collapsed so tragically, one must look at this very engine of power. Before the great Colosseum existed, the heart of Rome held a private, man-made lake belonging to the Emperor Nero. It was the centerpiece of his extravagant times, Domus Aurea, or Golden House, built after the Great Fire of 64 AD had laid waste to much of the city. While commoners were crammed into squalid, fire-prone tenements, living in perpetual insecurity and want, the tyrant Nero brazenly seized the city's most fertile and central land to construct his personal paradise. Indifferent to the desperate cries of his people, before long, the empire's resentment boiled over into bloody rebellion. Nero was declared an enemy of the state and eventually took his own life in shame. Yet the lake remained a gaping, stagnant wound in the city, an undeniable symbol of the bottomless greed and utter selfishness of a dictator. Then came Vespasian, a wise, battle-hardened, and pragmatic emperor. In that old wound, he saw a golden opportunity to reinvent the empire's image and soothe the volatile populace. He ordered the lake to be drained, erasing every trace of Nero's tyranny, and replaced it with a colossal public monument for 50,000 Roman citizens. It was a masterstroke of political theatre, a brilliant move to win the hearts of the masses through a grand gesture of giving back. The message was clear and powerful. Land that once belonged to a despot now belonged to the people, serving their pleasure. But behind this veneer of generosity lay a harsher, darker truth. The Colosseum was built with the plundered spoils of the brutal Jewish war, and the vast majority of the labor came from tens of thousands of prisoners of war stripped of their freedom. In other words, those who had dared to resist Rome were forced to pour their sweat, tears, and very lives into building a monument to their enemies' glory. It was a warning in stone, a testament to the most ruthless form of subjugation Rome could impose. In 80 AD, when Emperor Titus inaugurated the arena, the festivities lasted for an unprecedented 100 consecutive days. Wild beasts were paraded and slaughtered. Savage hunts took place in artificial jungles, and gladiators fought to the death amidst thunderous applause. Crucially, every Roman was granted free entry, regardless of wealth or status. The effect was beyond all expectation. The image of the empire was spectacularly redefined. Rome was no longer the dark shadow of Nero's tyranny. It was now the embodiment of unshakable power and boundless generosity. It became a realm of magnificent spectacle, an empire that knew exactly how to make its people forget their daily miseries by forcing them to look up at the brilliant, blinding light power had ignited before them. Imagine for a moment that you are an ordinary Roman in the 1st century, an anonymous, weary face in this great city. You are not a noble senator draped in silk, nor a wealthy merchant, nor a general returning in triumph. You are merely a poor citizen, perhaps unemployed or scraping by on precarious day labor, living in a cramped, damp room with a spouse and 4 hungry children. You dwell in a crowded tenement that could go up in flames or collapse at any moment. The walls are as thin as paper, the air is suffocating with the smell of sewage and charcoal, and your day begins before the sun, spent mostly hunting for odd jobs to earn a few measly coins. You haul heavy stones, sweep filth from the streets, or perhaps even clean the city's latrines if the pay is right. Your food is a meager, dusty ration of grain, and you live hand to mouth. In such a life, joy is a foreign concept. There is only the relentless, exhausting grind of worry. But today is different. Today, There are games. Today, you get to escape. You walk past noisy markets and ancient temples thick with the scent of incense, moving through the stench of the slums, when suddenly your eyes meet the Colosseum. It is likely the largest, most magnificent structure you have ever seen, a majestic titan of stone that commands the very horizon. As you draw closer, you are pulled into a massive tide of people surging toward the gates, all sharing the same electric anticipation. Through moss-covered stone corridors, spiraling staircases, and broad ramps, the crowd is funneled like water, huddling together in a state of feverish excitement. Then, quite suddenly, a vast, infinite space opens before you. The arena reveals itself, staggering in its immense proportions. The emperor appears, regal in his magnificent robes, bathed in the roar of 50,000 subjects. In that instant, a poor man like you can forget the squalor of your room. You forget the gnawing hunger in your belly. You forget the daily humiliations of being a nobody. All that remains is the singular feeling of belonging to something divine and absolutely powerful. To be a Roman is, for this moment, a source of indescribable, soaring pride. This is the most significant aspect of the Colosseum's sophisticated control. The manipulation does not begin when the games start or when the first blood is spilt on the sand. It begins with urban planning, with its strategic location, and the way citizens are compelled to pass this monument daily. The Colosseum sat at the strategic intersection of the poor working-class districts, the sacred temples, and the political heart of the empire. Nestled in a natural basin between three hills, almost anyone approaching would first view it from above. It gradually filled their vision until it became the sole focus of the landscape, a magnet for every eye. Before even stepping inside, the spectator was psychologically primed to be awed, to be grateful, and to be fiercely, unthinkingly loyal to the state. 80 entrances ringed the exterior, a design that appeared egalitarian, as if open to all. In reality, the social class system was hardwired into the very architecture. The emperor and the elite had their own private, luxurious entrances, entirely separate from the common folk, ensuring they never had to brush shoulders with the great unwashed. The seating tiers were strictly segregated, reflecting a person's exact standing in Roman society, an unbreakable, petrified order. Even the facade of the building told a story of hierarchy through its architectural language. The Romans stacked the Greek orders of columns, from the simple and sturdy to the ornate and refined. The Doric at the base for strength, the Ionic in the middle for harmony, and the Corinthian at the top for imperial luxury. To them, class was not something to hide. It was the self-evident proof of greatness. When a man sat in that arena, he wasn't just watching a blood sport. He was being wordlessly reminded of his place within a rigid, unalterable system, a definitive confirmation of his identity and his worth. He was a cog in a glorious machine. Even the shape of the Colosseum was no accident. It was an oval, not the perfect circle often used for temples to symbolize divine harmony and eternity. The oval shape kept the spectator's eyes moving back and forth, creating a restless tension and a sense of constant, nervous momentum in the drama below. It allowed no one to look away. There was no visual rest. Gladiators entered, the crowd reacted with fury, the emperor gestured, and fates were sealed in a heartbeat. It was not a place for passive observation. It was a carefully choreographed environment where the audience's emotions were steered according to a calculated plan. It was an emotional cockpit, designed to fly the populace toward a specific state of mind. The true marvel that elevated this place beyond any mere stage lay hidden beneath the sand, the time's hypogeum. This was a vast, two-story underground labyrinth of tunnels and machinery. Deep within this hidden world, hundreds of faceless, Sweating laborers operated pulleys, lifts, and trapdoors in perfect synchrony. From here, savage beasts, elaborate props, and even men could emerge onto the arena floor as if appearing from thin air, seemingly by magic. Every movement was meticulously timed to create a sense of the miraculous, leaving the audience stunned and believing in the omnipotence of the state. Yet behind this magic was a colossal, invisible system of slave, labor, logistics, and a ruthless class structure. The Colosseum was merely the glittering tip of a massive imperial iceberg, hiding a dark and brutal reality that the public was never meant to see. Why then, after 2,000 years, does the Roman Empire still haunt our imagination? Other empires were larger or more powerful at various points, yet few have anchored themselves so deeply in the human psyche. We remember the great emperors, the brave gladiators, and the eternal stone roads. But the reality for most Romans was one of crushing poverty and total dependence on grain shipments from far-off lands like Egypt. Rome was a city of over 1 million people, the largest in the world, but it was so fragile that a single delayed shipment or a bad harvest could spark an immediate violent riot. Emperor Claudius was once nearly killed by a mob in the Forum, simply because a grain ship arrived late. The emperors understood that the true threat was not an enemy at the distant borders, but the hungry, discontented masses within the capital itself. Thus, they devised the policy of bread and circuses, panem et circenses. Keep the bellies full and the minds occupied with mindless violence. This was not a humanitarian effort to end poverty. It was a sophisticated strategy for social stability, a proven formula for control. Ironically, the very pillars that made Rome great were the ones that eventually pushed it toward a slow, agonizing collapse. The empire functioned on a core requirement: continuous expansion. The legions, the massive public works, the grain subsidies, and the blood games were not funded by domestic taxes, but by the spoils of newly conquered lands. Expansion was the profit model. It was the lifeblood of the state. When expansion stopped, the machinery began to fail. With no new wealth flowing in, yet with the army still needing pay, and the people still demanding their free bread and games, the state entered a desperate, terminal spiral. As the crisis deepened, the spectacles became even more extravagant to mask the rot. Emperor Commodus famously entered the arena himself, playing the part of a gladiator while ignoring his duties of state. Emperor Caracalla spent so lavishly on festivals that he had to debase the currency and murder the wealthy to fund his games. It is a terrifying image. A ship slowly sinking into the dark sea while the crew frantically sets off fireworks on the deck to maintain the illusion of prosperity. Perhaps the most haunting lesson is not just that the crowd is easily manipulated, but that the rulers themselves become addicted to the absolute power the crowd grants them. Imagine 50,000 pairs of eyes fixed on your hand, waiting for a single gesture. A small sign from you can change the atmosphere from a roar to a deafening silence. That kind of power distorts the soul. Once tasted, very few have the strength to ever let it go. Marcus Aurelius stood as a rare and profound exception among the long line of Roman emperors. He harbored a deep-seated disdain for those blood-soaked spectacles, viewing them as nothing more than barbaric and ultimately futile displays. He was famously known to sit in the arena and read his books, convinced that these gladiatorial matches were merely a tool to distract the populace from the genuine, systemic rot that was tearing the empire apart. In an attempt to address the root causes of the empire's decline, he slashed the budget for the games, redirecting those funds towards more practical and sustainable governance. Yet, the people despised him for it. They rejected his stoic rule, branding him cold and miserly. In their eyes, he was a king who refused to play the part they expected, a man who remained a total stranger to their culture of entertainment. Tragically, His son Commodus would later plunge back into that very system like a desperate addict, repeating the ruinous mistakes of the past. It serves as a bitter, enduring truth. When a society becomes conditioned to react to high drama rather than pragmatic policy, reform becomes infinitely more difficult than mere performance. Eventually, the people simply lose the desire to listen, to reason. This is perhaps the reason why the story of the Colosseum remains so hauntingly relevant, echoing through the centuries with its chilling warnings. The issue does not lie solely within an ancient stone arena from 2,000 years ago. The reality is that humanity today still inhabits its own arenas, digital stages that are equally magnificent and enchanting, even if they are no longer built of stone and stained with physical blood. Modern spectacles may be more invisible, more technologically sophisticated, and more elegantly disguised, yet they retain the same power to commodify fear into entertainment, transform outrage into engagement, and reduce complex politics to a theatrical, emotionally charged performance. We must be wary, not of the existence of the spectacle itself, but of the moment it begins to think and feel on our behalf. It begins to dictate what deserves our attention and what we should conveniently ignore. That is the moment we surrender our capacity for independent thought and become little more than marionettes in someone else's play. Yet, when I look back at the Colosseum, what haunts me most is not the brutality of the games or the cruelty of a fallen empire. It is the fate of the ordinary people who sat in those stone tiers, the forgotten souls whose voices were never recorded by history. I think of a father who had just received a meager grain ration for his starving family, a man weighed down by the crushing burden of survival. I think of a mother who had lived so long in squalor and constant anxiety that a few hours of roar and bustle provided a brief escape from a life that felt heavy and hollow. Perhaps there was an old man who had survived wars and lost loved ones, who simply wanted to sit among the crowd, to feel that he hadn't yet been discarded by the world. When I view them through this lens, my judgment softens into a profound empathy. Human nature remains unchanged across the ages. When life becomes too exhausting or too harsh, we are naturally drawn toward anything that allows us to forget our suffering, however fleeting that relief might be. It is a temporary analgesic for the soul. Therefore, the lesson of the Colosseum should not end with the condemnation of a dead civilization. A greater, deeper truth we must grasp is the inherent fragility of the human spirit when faced with the magnetic pull of grand spectacles. We are not merely deceived by blatant, obvious lies. Often, it is the truth itself that ensnares us, or rather, a carefully curated fragment of the truth. A calculated perspective designed to lead us astray. The games in the Colosseum were real. The blood was real. The grandeur and the deafening cheers of the crowd were undeniably real. Yet, behind it all lay a devastating price, a trade-off that many either could not see or no longer had the mental fortitude to challenge, exhausted as they were by life itself. To my mind, this is the most terrifying reality across all eras. Not a lie so sophisticated it cannot be detected, but a portion of the truth packaged so attractively that people willingly accept it without ever thinking to ask a single question. If we still speak of the Roman Empire and its legendary arena today, it should not be merely to admire the enduring masonry or the architectural genius that has survived 2 millennia. We revisit this history to ask ourselves, are we currently living in modern versions of that same ancient story? How often have we been so mesmerized by a polished performance that we forgot to inspect the crumbling foundations beneath? How often do we let impulsive, fleeting emotions overrule the wisdom of the past? And how often do we lose ourselves in the collective noise, following the latest trends while ignoring the quiet voice of our own conscience? A society does not collapse overnight. It degrades incrementally as people grow accustomed to the blinding lights and learn to turn away from the uncomfortable shadows. For the generations to come, This is a lesson to be etched into the heart. Civilization is not measured by the scale of its monuments, the might of its armies, or the volume of its crowds. It is measured by whether its people remain lucid enough to recognize true value, to understand the hidden costs of their diversions, and to identify what might be fueling their excitement while simultaneously stripping away their critical thinking. A nation that builds greatness is admirable, but a nation that dares to question its own greatness and looks unflinchingly into the darkness behind the glory is far more worthy of respect. The Colosseum stands as a silent, eternal reminder. Power craves to be seen, and the masses crave to be entertained. Without vigilance, we easily barter our inner freedom and our independent thought for the comfort of belonging to a trend or a crowd. The most valuable thing you can take from this history is not a collection of dry facts, but a single question to keep you awake in the modern world. Is the thing that thrills me right now truly helping me understand the world? Or is it merely helping me forget what actually matters? If this story has resonated with you, let it sit for a while. Share it with your children and the younger generation, so they understand that history is not just yellowed pages in a library. It is a living mirror of our unchanging instincts. Sometimes, understanding why a seemingly eternal empire faltered is the only way for us to live more consciously and wisely in our own volatile age.